Hey everybody, Matt here, and I wanted to tell you about something cool my publisher is offering if you pre-order my forthcoming book, Filthy Rich Politicians. After you do that, go to filthyrichbook.com and sign up, enter your receipt number, and I will send you an autographed book plate. You will also have access to chapter 1 and the intro. You can download that immediately today, as well as access to a podcast where I talk about the book. So, pre-order Filthy Rich Politicians and go to filthyrichbook.com today to get these bonuses.
Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
We're June 29th, officially summer. Your kids are already been at camp, right?
My kids have been away to sleepaway camp. They are back. And Bill, by the way, we are inundated again with Canadian smoke today. I don't know if you were having that.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah. Incredibly bad air quality in the entire Washington, D.C. area. I'm talking about for hundreds of miles. And, they're saying, don't go outside, especially if you are a kid or elderly or have asthma. This is, the second time we've had this.
Wow. The plume, I guess, has missed us. So I wasn't on top of it.
It's crazy, man. And again, this isn't just a one-time anomaly. This is now I'm having to check my weather app. It's like, am I going to work out today? I'm going to go for a jog. Is it raining? What's the temperature? Oh, are there wildfires causing, smoke that I cannot ingest? So, but to answer your question, the kids are back. I guess we'll keep them locked in the house today. But they went away to sleepaway camp. It was a little bit emotionally fraught for me the first day or so, but they had a blast. And in fact, I'm wearing the hat of the camp where they went, which was on the eastern shore of Maryland.
I'm just saying now, I actually do have an air quality alert here, but we're not nearly as severe as where you are, but we're on kind of the edge.
Yeah, man. It's crazy. And I read today that there's almost 500 different wildfires in Canada. And I'm like, why can't we send in the Navy SEALs at this point? Do you know, is America involved in putting these fires out?
I don't know if we've sent people there or not. I can't speak knowledgeably about it. California's got its own problems.
All right, when I'm elected president, I'll do what Joe Biden has not had the guts to do. I'll put these fires out in 24 hours, Bill. They'll last 24 hours, and they will back down. That's my pledge to you.
The Simpsons, how dare you end the tire fire? Our greatest tourist attraction.
Oh, a quick announcement before I forget, Bill. We should probably tell the DMZ Army that you and I are taking a little hiatus for the summer. At least the next 2 weeks we're going to take off. And then my book comes out on July 18th. That'll be, I guess, 3 weeks from now. And obviously I'm going to be busy that week, but hopefully we can reconvene. And if nothing else, I'll tell you how the book is going. But for those who are our regular listeners who are, let's be honest, addicted to what we do, some classic episodes maybe will keep you from jonesing too bad for Bill and Matt.
Yeah, I normally we've been doing one family vacation in the summer, but this year for the first time, both my children will be at sleepaway camp in the same week. So I had to tack on an extra getaway that's kid-free. So I hope everybody understands that,
yes.
Duty calls.
I think Dick Armey who said the American dream is not owning your own home, it's having your children move out of your home or something like that. Going away to camp is as close as it gets for the next 8 or 10 years, I'm guessing. But enjoy. And I'm sure my picture of Bill Scher on vacation involves a lot of reading history books.
We're going to go to my wife are going to go to Portland, Maine, and they do have a lot of bookstores there, a lot of used bookstores. So where we're staying in the downtown is near a really huge used bookstore that apparently is very disorganized, which is the way used bookstores should be.
Love that.
I got to see if she'll let me like spend 3 hours in there or not.
Maybe swing by a non-used bookstore and just pick up a copy of Filthy Rich Politicians. We don't know how the New York Times algorithm works. Allegedly, it has something to do with local bookstores. So if you were to swing by, you could return them a week later. Just buy some copies as you go, wait a week or two, and then, well, I guess it might be hard to return them when you don't live in Maine, but whatever. We'll work that out. We'll give, you know what? You and I both sign one, and we raffle it off to the DMZ army. Problem solved.
All right, we should get down to business, Matt.
I guess we should, and I would love to start, Bill, with as a Gen Xer myself, I would love to start with your latest for the Washington Monthly.
Did I do our generation justice, Matt?
I think so. I mean, first of all, just by virtue of mentioning us, I think it's important because we are the smallest and least important generation in history, or at least in modern history. And I am, keenly interested in this. Last summer, I read Chuck Klosterman's book, The 90s, and I have thoughts. And it is interesting. There's never been a Gen X president, with the caveat that Barack Obama.
Stop you right now, Matt. Barack Obama is Gen X. I will die on this hill. I don't care.
Technically speaking, he is not.
I don't care that people have drawn this arbitrary line that Gen X starts being born in 1965 and he's 61 is ridiculous. Look, Barack Obama did not come of age during the Vietnam War, whereas the Clintons did. The Clintons are in college during Vietnam, and that generations are not defined by arbitrary years being demarcated. It's shared experiences. There's a baby boom experience of the Vietnam War that colors all of these, personal and political choices. When Barack Obama ran against Hillary Clinton in 2008, it was a generational contest. They didn't say two boomers running against each other. Obama was ready to turn the page from the politics of the past.
I didn't write these rules. I just abide by them.
But these are wrong rules that should be thrown out.
Everything's arbitrary. I mean, at some point, I think there's a spectrum, Bill, and I think that Obama exists on that spectrum of baby boomers. But whatever the case may be,
he is post. Whatever the case may be, post Vietnam. He is in the same. He's post Vietnam, yet within the Cold War. So you have a generational experience of Gen Xers who don't come of age with Vietnam in the background, but are still colored by both Cold War tensions and the rise of early computing, but pre-internet.
Okay. But Bill, I've got two kids. I've not looked into this. I've not independently verified this, but according to my son, my kids who are 2 years apart are in different generations. Like,
I'm sure someone's made an arbitrary line to say millennial, Gen Y stops here and Gen Z starts here.
But we live in a society of rules, Bill, and these rules have walls. Who's going to protect us from the barbarians if you start tearing down?
What typifies a shared generational experience should be the rule. Once the Cold War ends, with the Berlin Wall coming down and Gorbachev and the Soviet Union dissolving, 89, 91, then you have a new generational backdrop, and that also parallels with the rise of the internet. That's a generational shared experience. That's what defines the millennial.
Some people look at the generational lines and ask why. Bill looks at them and asks, why the F?
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, you're questioning authority, Bill. Where does this end, man? I'm willing to go along with what has been decided by the experts. You want to topple all this and just rewrite the rules. But whatever the case may be, let's talk about
some people will say Barack Obama is the so-called Jones generation, this kind of bubble between Boomer and Gen X, which I still don't accept, but at least it indicates that he's not Boomer. He's not in the same.
Does that mean he's like a big George Jones? Does this
I don't know where Jones comes from. I'm not sure what that name comes from, but Clinton and George W. Bush are boomers. Okay. And
we can agree on that.
right. And Biden, Trump and Biden are silent generation, if I remember correctly.
No,
So
is it?
was Trump
I think
boomer?
Trump is a boomer.
So
I think Trump's a boomer.
Trump was born. I'm sorry. This is high quality content on the DMZ.
I take it. One
He was
thing I
born
can pick up
46,
is
so
that,
he's just technically a boomer right after the end of World War II. Okay,
unless
so
we decide not to go with any rules, but I feel like you have strong. You
no,
have
no.
a
So
strong take
Trump
on
is
this.
squarely
This is
boomer. I apologize. So Trump, Clinton, Bush Jr., boomer, and Biden is silent. Yeah, we thought the silence almost were gonna get overlooked, but Biden snuck in there. And are we gonna have a second Generation X president or not? Is the question. And
I'm going to say not. I think. Wouldn't you say? Like, okay, let me put it to you in the form of a question.
yeah.
What do you think the odds are that the next president will either be Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
Oh, I think that's strong case for one or the other.
80%? 90%?
Something's got to change in the Republican primary for it. I mean, Trump is in a very strong position right now. I mean, I did a Twitter thread about this the other day, and I think I mentioned it on the show. I mean, as much as people like to discount early polling, no one with Trump's lead has lost a primary in the modern primary era. The closest would be Hillary, who topped out at a 28-point lead in national polling, and Trump is now in the low 30s. So you could call them similar. But
there's no Barack Obama. Barack Obama was. I mean, Barack Obama was an amazing, once in a generation political, whatever generation that may be, Bill. Once in a generation political talent and political athlete, as Pat Buchanan might say. There's nobody in the Republican Party right now that has
just him
that
it's not just his personal skills. I'm actually reading Obama's memoir right now in my book club. So we just covered the pre-presidential phase of Obama in that, and it really just brings back to life like what the anticipation of the historical moment was, how it was building since the keynote of 2004, that something was already stirring in 04, 05, 06, 07. And so when Obama gets in 2007, and he's in like the 20s, and Hillary's like in the 40s nationally. On one hand, it's a big lead, but it's obscuring that there's this huge pool of African American voters who still had some Clinton appreciation and weren't quite ready to believe that Obama was for real. And it's not until he wins Iowa.
Maybe they also didn't want to have their hopes dashed. Like if they psychologically, if they chose to believe in Obama and then he lost, that could be traumatizing.
Right. I
think there might have been some of that.
I mean, Jesse Jackson got a lot of African American support the first time around, and then Al Sharpton didn't as much. They're kind of like, okay, we're not going to do this just for the heck of it. We do want someone who's actually going to win these things. And once Obama wins Iowa, it was like, oh, he could actually win this thing. And then there's this huge shift nationally after that. This very large block of voters that's shifted very quickly. There's no evidence that something similar is going to happen on the Republican side. I'm not saying Trump is unbeatable.
Although I have heard that Mike Pence is surging in Iowa. Your dog hates Mike Pence.
No,
you've trained him.
The dog is bothering the cat. Sorry to be distracted. So anyway, it's at minimum highly unusual for someone with a lead of this size to collapse. Like, there was a Rudy Giuliani collapse in 2008, but he topped out like 17 points, not 30 points. And Giuliani was sort of a weird front runner. He had these moderate social positions, and then got hit with a scandal in late 2007, using government money to pay for his extramarital trips. So Trump is much more known commodity, clearly squarely in the mainstream of the party politically as it currently is constructed, has been hit with scandal after scandal after scandal, and only gets stronger in the process. So the things that took Hillary and Giuliani down don't seem to be present at the current time. So anyway,
So you're saying 80, 90%?
Initial question, Trump and Biden are strong front runners. It's not looking like this is Generation X's moment. But here you have, and I should add one more thing. The Republican Party has been nominating very old people for a while. They didn't always. But since 1976, nearly every nominee has been over 60 years old, with the exception of George W. Bush, who was 55, if I recall, and had family name, helping him. So they haven't been very inclined to go with the young upstart the way Democrats have, in Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. So if you are Ron DeSantis, 44 years old, Nikki Haley, 51 years old. I mean, there are other young, Will Hurd and Francis Suarez and Vivek Ramaswamy are young too, but DeSantis and Haley are the bigger names who are Generation X, and have not been shy.
Vivek is like 35.
What's that? Ramaswamy? He's 37.
Vivek is only like
37.
Is that how old? Okay.
Yeah. You would think. I mean, these are two people who are not shy about playing an age card, particularly Haley. He literally said we should have a competency test for people over 75. And DeSantis is a bit more subtle. I got a lot of energy. Look at my young kids, that kind of thing. You would think they would have as part of their case, here's what I'm going to do to help this party expand our appeal to younger voters, which we have clearly struggled with in the last several election cycles. But what they have done, this is not like the heart of their campaigns, but they've both toyed with nostalgia. Remember what it was like back then? Remember when everything
back in my day?
Yeah.
Back in my day, we didn't have mail-in voting. We went to the. I can't even do it. But you referenced, and I was happy to see this. You referenced Dana Carvey's
Grumpy Old Man,
which I'm sure.
Really,
I'm dating myself.
But you watch though. I mean, late 80s, early 90s SNL were just masters of taking the thinnest possible premise and creating absolute gold. Like, let's have Dana Carvey be a grumpy old man. End of premise. There's not much to it.
Yeah,
we did such a good job with it.
And it wasn't just a one-time. That was a recurring bit that he probably did 5 times at least on SNL.
So, here is. I'm going to pull up the. Haley gave a speech to the Faith and Freedom Coalition just this past Saturday, which, granted, I'm sure is an older crowd. But she says, do you remember when you were growing up? Do you remember how simple life was? Do you remember how safe you felt? It was about faith, family, and country. Your parents raised you to be a responsible individual. You went to school and you learned what you needed to be successful. You went to church and you found your faith and your conscience. Do you want that again? Because we can have that again. But in order to do that, we need to have a new generational leader. We have to leave the negativity and the drama and the chaos of the past. So she's shoehorning this argument that can apply to both Trump and Biden, that she should be the next generational leader. but with this romanticized nostalgia argument. And be one thing if you grew up in the 1950s, but she grew up in the 1980s. She's literally born the same year I was. So I know what it was like to grow up in the 80s.
It's total bullshit. It's pandering. I've seen some people describe it as fascist, sort of looking this because it's always a greater time that mythical greater time that existed that we have to get back to. Well, first of all, it wasn't great for everyone. Second of all, people used to have to get under their desks and have drills for nuclear bombs and stuff.
That's boomers, though.
Whatever. The idea that things. No, here's the other thing too. As I'm trying to think of who someone tweeted this. Anyway, as we all know, when you are a kid, things seem great, because someone else has all the you've got maximum, freedom, zero responsibility. If mom and dad are footing the bill, it seems safe. It seems comfortable.
I remember as
she's
a kid,
she's either super stupid or she's playing this very cynical nostalgia game that she knows is BS.
Maybe I'm a little influencer because I grew up in 1980s New York. I was in New York City as a young kid, then most of my childhood in the suburbs.
In Needle Park.
Well, the 80s was this constant barrage of, crime and kidnapping and race riots. This is Crown Heights and Bernie Getz and all that stuff. Not to mention, to quote Billy Joel, as I did in the piece, AIDS crack Bernie Getz. This is what the 80s was about.
By the way, did you see Fall Out Boy is doing a new version of that song about the 90s?
I did see that, Matt Lewis. And look, I'm not saying Witness at the Fire is Billy Joel's greatest work, his finest in the lyrics, but you listen to the Fall Out Boy.
By the way, I could literally sit here. I could do that whole song, and I'm sure you can too. I could do every word of it.
You can, when you listen to the two different versions, you can see there was far more thought and structure in the Billy Joel version, the Fall Out Boy version. There's just Fall Out Boy feels much more random. It's not remotely chronological. They lean on people dying multiple times. I don't think you get a flavor of. Billy Joel had a sort of a thematic point, which is there's been this constant stream of awfulness from decade to decade, and the Fall Out Boy thing just seemed like a mishmash. I had more respect for the Billy Joel song after hearing Fall Out Boy.
Well, the Billy Joel song is very good, but it's not just all bad stuff either. It's Brooklyn's got a winning team, Davy Crockett, Peter. It's chronicling his life, and yes, I think it's full of crazy times as well. But probably half the song is just stuff that happened and that were big in the news. Liston beats Patterson, right? Whatever,
right?
But that's a song, man. That's a career. I don't even know what we're talking about because you keep going on and I keep interrupting you because you keep saying.
The point is,
you keep saying, provocative things.
The point is, and then DeSantis had a comment when he's in New Hampshire saying, remember when a cartoon was just a cartoon, your parents have to worry about what was we watching on TV? It's what are you? I was having arguments with my parents my entire childhood about sex and violence on TV and what people were watching cartoons.
Oh, yeah. Let me stop you here real quick. Number one, Bugs Bunny used to dress up like a woman all the time and kiss guys. So what would they do if that happened? What would they do? They would be banned, boycotting. But to your point, Bill, and I saw you made this very good point on Twitter. I watch stuff. Look, my kids and I watch every night King of the Hill, which I think is a great show. But it's got the reason I like to watch it is pretty much everything that they're going to encounter in life is on that show. It's got the gamut of the human experience, including the woman who's cheating on her husband with the Native American John Red. I mean, you name it. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens, but I think the values overall are positive, and there's usually a moral to the story. But more to the point, it exposes them to weird things that they're going to encounter in life. And as a Christian conservative, and I'm not saying I'm a great Christian, and I'm probably not even a great conservative, but as a Christian conservative, the worst, if you want your kids to grow up in the tradition that you're raising them in, the last thing you should do is completely deprive them of experience and information. Like, then they're going to go to college or wherever out in the real world, and they're going to be inundated with all sorts of stuff and temptations. Like, I want to slowly expose my children to what they're going to encounter in the world. And by the way, do it in a way that's safe and where we can discuss it. I'll hit pause. We'll have a 5 or 10 minute discussion / debate on what we just saw. Mm-hmm. And it's very nuanced. And I want to talk to them about all sorts of stuff. So that's what I loved about your tweet, Bill.
Well, my tweet, I should say, I try to do that too. I've sat with my kids and, even watching Simpsons, having to stop and discuss this drug reference or this racial yes. reference, and I don't really like doing it, but this is the thing that struck me. So I tweeted in response to this woman in.
No, I see it. I like it. I see it. Now, obviously, there are things that I would not want my kids to see, but with what you're talking about, even with The Simpsons, I see it as an opportunity, as a teachable moment. I am grateful for that.
So this woman in Florida, got upset. I actually have a bunch of these books, these I Am books. I Am Rosa Parks. I Am Lucille Ball. I Am Billie Jean King. And my kids loved them. I didn't have the Billie Jean King, but I had a bunch of the other ones. And the Billie Jean King book mentions that she's gay. And it was in the elementary school library of this Florida school. And this woman, is now on a bender saying, how dare this book be accessible in the school library. And, beyond, the inanity of being this upset about someone being gay in this day and age, my point was, you just can't expect that your child is never going to see something. I don't care what your politics are, left, middle, or right. Yeah. Your kid's going to see something in the world that you don't like, does not comport with your values, and it's going to ask you about it. And it might be hard to explain. It might be uncomfortable and unpleasant, but tough luck, kid. You're going to have, if you're having a kid, you're having a parent, you're going to have those moments, whether you like it or not. I mean, I agree with you. These things you look forward to and lean into as teachable moments, but even if you don't like doing it, too bad. Yeah. It's going to come up. You can try to keep the bubble going for as long as possible.
Look, I mean,
last.
Yeah, so protectionism doesn't work, whether it's the economy or whether it's. But look, obviously, I mean, here's the obvious caveat. There are things that, as a child, if you're exposed to too early, could be traumatizing, could be bad. But there's at a certain age, I think that we live in a world, and you're going to encounter things whether you like it or not. And if you want your kids to grow up sharing your values, you are better off slowly kind of exposing them to alternative points of view. I tell my kids, my one son thinks I'm, too liberal and too permissive. It's like he's very hardcore in his, in his beliefs, which I respect. But I'm like, I'm trying to tell him evolution is, just you can believe in God and evolution. This is not mutually exclusive. I don't care what they say.
Ever think, Matt Lewis, you are going to grow up and be Stephen Keaton and not Alex P. Keaton?
All I need is the beard, my friend. There was a kangaroo. My favorite line from that show is a Stephen Keaton line when he says to Alex, there's certain things parents are conditioned to expect when they leave home and they leave their kids, spilt milk on the rug. broken glass, broken vase. There was a kangaroo in my living room. That's when Alex, I guess Steve and Elise
Mhm.
Keaton go away for a
Yeah.
little trip, and they leave Alex and Mallory at home. This is before Airbnb, but
Right.
Alex and Mallory, as I recall, rent out the
Yeah.
house
Because there
to
was a
make
big
money,
homecoming
and
game at
for
the
like
local
there's like an
school.
Ohio State game,
Yeah.
and the other team, I guess their mascot is a kangaroo or
Right.
something,
They stole the mascot.
something like that.
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
great show. But I guess I've become Steve Keaton, um, and so be it. There are worse, there are
So
worse things.
to go back to DeSantis. So DeSantis said, sorry, uh,
And by the way, if there's never been a more Gen X moment on the show
yes,
than
yes.
just transpired.
So DeSantis said, when I was a kid, you watch a cartoon, it was a cartoon. Now it's like parents have to worry, like, okay, what are my kids being exposed to? And there was always been that worry with TV, particularly in the 1980s. There were activist groups that were campaigning against too much violence in cartoons, too much sex and violence on TV in general. And even Disney. I mean, there was
And
one
by the
group.
way, it was worse. It was worse back then. I don't know about TV, but movies. You
Yeah,
go back and watch a movie from the 1980s, uh, you're much more likely to see some breastises in a 1980s
There was
movie.
like there's a whole
And
canon
they're
of
bad
movies
words.
which is like older women having sex with teenage boys, like literal grooming, like advertised in full in print newspapers, uh, and no one batting an eye.
Yeah. No, that's just how it was. I mean, it actually wasn't really like that, but in the movies, it was ubiquitous.
Right.
It was in many ways worse than today.
Uh, so, uh, so for DeSantis and Haley to try to play this game, it's not going to resonate with anybody from their own generation, let alone younger generations. So maybe it will appeal to people older than them who are more conditioned to have romanticized nostalgia. And granted, that's primarily who votes Republican primaries. It's an older skewing. I mean, even the Democratic electorate is. I mean, young voters are only so many people, but the Republican electorate skews older than the Democratic electorate. And so I get the pull that they're under. I get that they are thinking about those voters more than the younger voters. But they're already getting lapped by Donald Trump, who already has a bomb with those voters, who already can play the anti-woke cards. So just having being an echo of what he's doing, I don't see how that's going to get you very far, and it's not getting them very far. Their inherent
it is not.
distinguishing characteristic is that they are from a different generation, that they can provide something that Donald Trump can't. Show us what that might look like. That's what they're not doing. And I'm not going to argue again. I think beating Trump is a tough nut to crack at this point, but they are not doing themselves or their party a service by speaking inauthentically about their own generation when they desperately need to find a way to connect with younger voters.
You just said something. You said the word inauthentically, and I think that's key here to them not being able to pass the torch to a new generation. So as I've said this before on the DMZ, but I think that I am in many ways a Gen Xer. And I read Chuck Klosterman's book, The 90s, this summer, and he talks about kind of the defining characteristic of Gen Xers, and it's a preference for, or not a preference, but like a demand for authenticity. And according to Klosterman, and this is debatable, but he argues that we're the only generation in history that viewed selling out as a bad thing. So assuming his preference is true, I believe that for whatever reason, even though I've always been a conservative, that those Gen X values were deeply inculcated in me. And I think that explains why when I look at Nikki Haley, the way she's been acting and talking, and I look at Ron DeSantis, I find them lame and aesthetically off-putting. Like, I find them repellent. And it's not because we disagree fundamentally on political philosophy. It's a more of a stylistic thing. They seem like phonies, and there's nothing worse to a Gen Xer than being a phony. Now, the other interesting point that Klosterman makes in the book, though, is that even though this sort of authenticity and the dislike of selling out is the defining values of Gen Xers, it actually doesn't describe the majority of Gen Xers. Like, just like the majority of young people in the 60s or 70s might have actually been Nixon voters, we think of hippies, we think of Woodstock. And I think there's a similar thing at play here, that, like, for whatever reason, I'm out of touch with my brethren in the Republican Party of the Nikki Haley's and the Ron DeSantis.
Well, the Gen Xers came in the Reagan era. I mean, I'm not sure I buy the Klosterman premise that Gen Xers are against selling out. This is a culture of people that grew up on Alex P. Keaton and Secret of My Success and Bright Lights, Big City. There was a romanticization of living the high life in the corporate. I mean, working girl, for Pete's sake. There obviously were alternative kids and who rebelled against that, but I wouldn't say they defined the entire generation.
But wouldn't you say? I mean, I think your point's well made, and I think you're absolutely correct that it's wrong and incomplete and misleading to attribute to any generation a kind of monolithic ethos.
Yeah.
So I completely agree. But wouldn't you say that the stereotype about Gen X is, we're not going to be glam, we're not going to wear the makeup, and we're going to put on, flannel shirts and listen to Nirvana. And the worst thing you can do is sell out. In fact, you're not going to take our music and put it like in a Chevy truck ad. We don't need the money, because that would be the worst thing you could do.
I don't think of Gen X like that at all. I mean, I think of Gen X as, big hair and shoulder pads.
Dude, that's the 80s. This is the 90s I'm talking about.
But these are people who grew up in that. They grew up with that ethos. They grew up with that corporate, he who has the most toys wins ethos. That I think is carried over into their.
That was being. Okay. Well, I think we just have a kind of a definitional worldview difference then about how we even perceive this era. But I believe that I'm at least on the
grunge
side.
Era, which is more millennial, rebels against that. But that's more of a millennial thing than a Gen X thing.
I wouldn't say so. Nirvana came out in 1991.
Well, again, we're talking post Cold War. Nirvana is the beginning of a new cultural era, where the frat house era Beastie Boys.
When I say came out, I mean Nevermind broke in 91.
Right. I mean,
they probably were around.
That's an inflection point culturally, because listen to late 80s music, it's nothing like that. It's much cheesier. Beastie Boys, they might seem as very edgy today, but like literally late 80s, early Beastie Boys is fight for your right to party. I mean, they were like quintessential frat boys. They weren't like super hipster edgy. There's all sorts of dance music from the late 80s, which is like hardly anything that's substantial and intellectually stimulating. Forgive me for lacking an example at the tip of my fingers. Nirvana is a total culture shift, where like all of a sudden it becomes cool to be an alternative kid and cool to wear grungy clothes. I mean, that wasn't the case literally 2 years prior to that.
But Ron DeSantis is what, 44 years old, right?
right? So DeSantis, by my Obama standards, you could argue DeSantis should be treated as a
Yes.
millennial, not a Gen Xer, because his high school, college years are
How can I have a
post-Cold War.
conversation? How can I have a conversation with you about generations when you will not, when you don't even buy into the premise of when the generations happen?
At least in the case of
It's
my
impossible
article,
to have this conversation.
When DeSantis about watching cartoons, he was watching cartoons in the 80s. So in that sense, I can talk about him in the same breath as Haley.
Okay. 1993 was 30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So DeSantis, what year would DeSantis have been, like, say 7 or 8? I'm bad at math.
Well, I think DeSantis was born he's 44 now. I think he was born 78.
Okay.
So he was,
So he was 10 years old in 88.
correct.
Right? Okay. Okay, so maybe he's watching some He-Man. He's watching some G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
He's watching Transformers.
And G.I. Joe,
that's stuff, right?
G.I. Joe was often pointed to as an example of excessive cartoon violence in the 80s. And as I mentioned in my piece, one of the biggest...
Well, it was a show, by the way, love that show, A. B, the whole show was designed to sell toys, right? That was the whole point of the show, because you weren't allowed to advertise.
Yeah. Part of the critique was that Saturday morning cartoons were becoming big advertisements, milled in with excessive violence to push product.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've gone on this probably for too long. And I know you want to talk about RFK Jr., which quite frankly, I'm loath to talk about. I do not want to take him as seriously as a candidate. In fact, I'm compelled to argue that we should never talk about him again after this point. But I do want to acknowledge that you want to raise him because he has made waves as of late.
I want to pass the torch to an older generation of sons. So, yeah, RFK's been making news. He was on Joe Rogan. That made a splash, and he challenged a vaccine, a virologist or something to a debate. That's probably never going to happen. Then he made this video of him doing push-ups and lifting weights. Does not seem to be able to lift that much, but he's pretty ripped, particularly for a 69-year-old man. Game recognizes game. So he looks good. I don't like the move aesthetically of wearing the jeans without the shirt, but whatever. That's my preference. But I will say, I prefer the shorts if I'm going to be topless, but whatever. and hopefully I'm at a pool or an ocean, not outside, lift benching or whatever, or inclined. But there's two interesting things that are happening, Bill, simultaneously. Number one, it appears that RFK Jr.'s support in the Democratic primary has basically been cut in half. He was at like 20% in 2 or 3 polls a few months ago, and now I think he's more 10 or 12% in the latest. But the other thing, and then I'll shut up, is I keep hearing people talking about him. Yesterday I had lunch. My kids and my mother-in-law, she's talking about him. I live in West Virginia. Everyone's talking. There's like a lot of people like RFK Jr. Now, I don't think any of them are Democratic primary voters. They're liking him. They're talking about him. There's buzz. But it's sort of like...
These are conservative family members of yours, right? These are not Democrats.
No, none of them are Democrats. Or, it's conceivably possible some of them would vote in a Democratic primary for him, but it would be like the way Trump, changed the demographics of the Republican Party.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, he got 20 in CNN, and I think 21 in Emerson, basically on name recognition.
And I think there was a Fox poll.
Yeah. Well, Fox had him in April. Fox had him in 19. So you go back to April and May. get Emerson 21, Fox 19, Rasmussen 19 now in May, and CNN 20 in May. And then he gets a bunch of media attention. And now the last 5 polls are 14, 15, 8, 15, 17, 17 being Fox. So his RCP average now is 14.4. And I saw
better than I thought. Okay.
What's that? I saw
honestly, that's better than I thought.
Well, that's 17 from Fox definitely helps him out.
We're having fans, DMZ Army listeners. Clearly, we're having there must be a delay that's causing issues with us today.
Oh, sorry about that. I saw a Quinnipiac, Pennsylvania poll, I think just yesterday, that broke out Kennedy's support or favorability by party. And he's underwater with Democrats, and he's above water with Republicans and independents. So I think we're seeing the gradual understanding this is not just your run-of-the-mill Kennedy. This is a different cat. And to the extent he's being liked by people seeing him on TV, it's because he's going on to conservative media and being liked by conservatives who are not going to vote in a Democratic primary. And I think he's even drifting more and more conservative himself. I think he's saying more conservative things than he was saying 10, 15 years ago, particularly on the border, for example.
Well, he also came out and he's saying that environmental factors are making or maybe making people more likely to be gay or trans today.
Right. These are all things that are not embraced by most Democratic voters. So I am annoyed because I wrote a piece early on saying this guy is bona fide crackpot. There's no way any media institution would take a candidate like this seriously if not for his last name. Any reasonably competent political reporter would look at these numbers and say, this is not indicative of a genuine appetite for his platform in the Democratic Party. It is residual name ID that's going to dissipate over time as more and more people know about what he's actually all about. So if we weren't so enamored with, this is a case of data journalism gone awry. If you used your brain, you would say, okay, I'm not going to take this seriously. You do it because, oh, well, I guess I have to write about it because look at this double-digit number. And look, when I write a story about him, it gets a lot of clicks. So I guess I'm going to keep writing about him. He's good for clicks. He's good content because he says crazy things. So he's getting more media than he deserves. Although he's not getting that much mainstream media attention, he's getting niche media attention, but it's enough to keep the grift going. And I would say, I would prefer to just cut off the media auction supply completely, if not for the fact that I think it's going to end up being on the Trump's VP shortlist. I could totally see Trump being very enamored with a Trump Kennedy ticket and trying to use him, trying to think he could poach Democrats with the name. And I think Kennedy said at one point he would never do that, but I don't trust this guy's word for anything. I think I see him enjoying the validation he is getting from conservative media and being increasingly willing to say conservative things to keep that going, which of course makes him even more ridiculous as a Democratic prospect. But if that's not really the game here, then he could very well go deeper and deeper into the conservative echo chamber and possibly make himself appealing to Trump.
I think Trump Kennedy is I had not really thought about that until just now. I had not taken that seriously until just now, but you may have a point. I mean, Trump loves branding. That is a great sounding name. Trump Kennedy is a good brand. As you noted, it could appeal to some Democrats, a certain type of Democrat.
Well, they don't know any kind of Democrat. It's sort of but he might think it does.
Well, it's sort of like Clinton Gore too. It's doubling down on he's not trying to balance the ticket
Well, this
you
is sort
know,
of the bigger
with
question, and maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
yeah.
But
I mean, he's balancing the ticket part in terms of partisan in his mind, but
yeah,
with the Democrat, but it would be two 70-something-year-old men
I think he's
who both have
69
a
now.
right-wing appeal, populist right-wing appeal.
What do you think is going to go into Trump's VP calculation? Does he want another Mike Pence who is bland and
No.
doesn't show up the guy at the top of the marquee that puts the Republican establishment at ease? Or does he want to go with more of a wild and crazy sycophant uh, that uh, is a thumb to the nose of the Republican establishment?
I think, I mean, again, I haven't had time to fully think this through, but just based on right now, you've persuaded me. I think Kennedy could be a contender for that, um, because of the name and because of the, you know, Democrat Republican post partisan idea of the whole thing. And I don't see Kennedy as being like Newt Gingrich. Remember, Newt said it came down to Newt Gingrich and Mike Pence, and Newt said, "Well, it depends whether Trump wants a two-pirate ticket or not." He's like, "We're both pirates." Well, I don't think Kennedy is as much of a pirate as Newt is. Like, I think Newt would not have been able to resist the urge to go out and be provocative and say interesting controversial things. It would have been a lot of cleaning up for Trump to do. I get the sense that although, you know, RFK Jr. has had a long tradition of crack pottery, that he would be more disciplined and that he could sort of fill the role as second in command or whatever. In a way, Newt would not constitutionally be able to like stop himself from talking.
Well, I think again, I can't know if Kennedy would actually do it, but I think it would be appealing to Trump because I mean, why do conservatives like Kennedy now? I mean, he doesn't agree with conservatives on everything down the line, but he talks smack about Democrats. He accuses Democrats of losing
Yeah.
their way. While validating certain conservative narratives about COVID and vaccines, and increasingly on border stuff. So he's useful to at least superficially uh, attack Democrats for certain hypocrisies and say they're too close to deep state, they're too close to corporations and all that kind of thing. So I
Yeah.
think that is going to be appealing to Trump.
I mean, I forget, you know, a while back we had a list and it was like Tulsi Gabbard, Carrie Lake, Elise Stefanik, Kirsten Sinema, maybe. I don't even remember. It was a lot of women that I think conventional wisdom suggested that Trump would balance the ticket like that. Um, I'm not so sure. I think once again, Bill, I think maybe you've talked me into something here.
Well, but could pick a woman. I mean, that's saying Taylor Greene. I mean, not like cinema, but I think Taylor Greene is certainly going to be someone who's going to be in the mix. But I don't see why Trump would say I have to have a woman. I mean, this is someone who is clearly sexist in many respects. So it's hard to totally read his mind of what I mean, and part of it's going to have to be who will accept the offer. He may not get his first choice, but and right now we have a strong sense that Carrie Lake and Taylor Greene would be hungry for that appointment, probably Stefanik too, and are doing things to suck up to him. But maybe sucking to him too much is not the way to go. Maybe again, it's hard to know, but Trump is going so deeper into conspiracy thinking himself that and clearly wants to run on how everyone's out to get me, witch hunt with the investigations, they rigged the election, all that kind of stuff. Uh, uh, Candidates who are already trafficking in that would seem appealing to him. Not someone who's going to cut against that, and I think Kennedy falls in that category.
All right, you've talked me into it. We may not agree on what constitutes generations or Gen Xers, but I think, at least for this moment, we're both persuaded it's going to be Trump Kennedy. So now the question is,
Not predicting, not
do I
predicting.
title this episode? You predicted. Do I title this episode "Grumpy Old Gen Xers" or do I title it "Trump Kennedy 24"? That's the only question that remains at the end of this.
We should probably wrap, but do you have, just as we started taping, the Supreme Court came down and abolished affirmative action for higher education. I don't know if you had any early thoughts on that.
Sounds like a plan to me. And I think that this court is, they're defending free speech and religious liberty. They're basically standing up to Donald Trump and his attempt to steal the election by doing things like letting state legislatures overturn the vote. And I think they're standing up against discrimination, which is effectively what this is, what racial preferences and affirmative action is. So I am with this Supreme Court. And I will say, I was always a big Amy Coney Barrett booster. And I think that is proven, that has panned out. She's I think on the right side of all sorts of issues, including I was very happy to see her and other Republican appointees stand up against the efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Well,
what about you?
I think this decision is a Roberts decision. I mean, I think this is Roberts' long game. There are things I think Roberts wanted to accomplish on the court. I think this is possibly his biggest one. Alito was hungry for that Roe v. Wade opinion, for the Dobbs opinion, his whole career. He clearly had the outlines of that. You see it in the testimony he gave when he was being nominated. Stuff he said in the hearings shows up in that opinion. I think that was, and I think for Roberts, essentially eradicating, making our jurisprudence and our code race blind, I think is a Roberts long game objective. And I'm not saying I agree with the decision, and I'm curious to see how it plays out in practice. Will colleges have other ways, like say need-based affirmative action ways, that they can meet the same goals, and so you don't have any negative repercussions? Or are we going to see in the course of 1 to 5 years a drop off of Black and Latino representation on college campuses, which might cause some concern and upset? That I can't predict just yet. It's different than the Dobbs decision, which you would see the negative impact on access to abortion immediately, literally immediately. And so you had that backlash right away. Here, we had another year until people apply for college again. And when we get data on that, probably is another year after that. And you might need to have a few years of data before you really see what the impact might be. But so not supporting it, kind of dubious of it, myself. Although I haven't read the opinion yet, so I'm not inclined to like the opinion. But I do think it is more indicative of a court that is perhaps ideological, but not partisan. We just had a week ago Roberts,
right? Like as you know, Bill, as you know, we talked last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever, about how this same court basically said southern states, you can't gerrymander
racially,
these congressional elections. So that is probably going to result in more minority representation in Congress. And so I like this court. I don't like the fact that Clarence Thomas and Alito take money from rich people to go on vacation or pay for their or whatever. But I think that this is a court that, and these Republican appointees have a judicial philosophy that I respect, and I do not think it is contingent on, in the short term, is this going to help Republicans or help Democrats?
Yeah,
It's not what it's about.
When
You can like it or you.
When Roberts did his initial Voting Rights Act decisions, particularly the Shelby County, there are people that not only accuse the court of being racist, but also partisan. They're doing this to suppress the Democratic vote. And what I've written about in the past was, at least in practice, those rulings did not suppress the Democratic vote. They were ginned up and energized to overcome whatever obstacles were in their way. And all these places where Voting Rights Act provisions changed, Democrats won races in. So I don't think the driving factor of the Roberts law game is let's make things easier for Republicans. I do think you want to make things race blind, whether that makes him racist or not. That's a separate debate. I think he wanted to do this on its own merits. And whether it helps Republicans or Democrats is not what factored into that long canon of opinions that he has been writing on this subject.
Yeah, and I do want to note that this decision was handed down literally minutes before we hit record and started taping this, so we see through a glass darkly. But Bill, it is my understanding that a majority of Democrats are with the court on this decision, and
hold up there.
The majority of, let me just finish this and you can rebut it, and that a majority of Asians and Hispanics are with the court. I think the only cohort that disagrees, and this is polling from before the decision came down, obviously, are African Americans. Are the only block of citizens, or the only cohort that disagrees with the premise that this decision establishes.
Now, I happen to have looked at this polling data recently. So there was a Pew poll that came out very recently. I think this article was June. I can't remember if the poll was taken April or May, but recently. The question was, as you may know, some colleges and universities around the country are selective, which means they can have many more applicants that they can admit. One of the factors some of these colleges take into account in admissions decisions is race and ethnicity in order to increase the racial and ethnic diversity of the school. All in all, do you approve or disapprove of selective colleges and universities doing this? Only 33% approve of that, 50% disapprove. So I imagine in terms of this, I'm not looking at the subsamples, but I imagine that would track with even Democrats, even Latinos, even Asians. I mean, Asians often get shorthanded in some of these affirmative action things, so that's not surprising.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a recent AP poll, Associated Press poll, that asked, the U.S. Supreme Court is weighing whether colleges and universities can consider race and ethnicity as part of their admissions decisions, a practice commonly known as affirmative action. Do you think the Supreme Court should or should not prohibit the consideration of race and ethnicity in admissions? 63% said the court should not prohibit affirmative action. Totally different result, but specific to the court. And I think it's reminiscent of what we see in abortion polling, where someone say, "Yeah, I'm pro-life. I think there should be restrictions, but Roe v. Wade. Oh, I want Roe v. Wade." So there could be this kind of squeamish middle that kind of doesn't like the concept of it, but is reluctant to see the court go in and just flat out ban it. So I think that as I was saying before, I think since the impact of it's going to be kind of delayed at the college admissions level, I think in my mind, the jury's out how the public is going to absorb this. I think it's going to depend on what the actual impact is.
Indeed. All right. Great conversation. If you're still listening out there, then I assume you like us and you'll tolerate us no matter what. But I do think there was some delay in our communications today, which resulted in a less seamless, free-flowing conversation. But I still think fabulous content, especially the Stephen Keaton stuff, which, that's why people come here.
Sha-la-la-la, Matt Lewis.
Where would I be without you, Bill Scher? And where will I be the next 2 weeks while you're gone? That I don't know. I will shamelessly promote my book, because by the time, I guess, Bill, by the time you and I do this again, unless something crazy happens, it will be out. And so please, you can pre-order it anywhere: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever fine books are sold. And if you go to filthyrichbook.com and enter your receipt number, you will get the bonuses that I've been talking about ad nauseum. So please do that. I greatly appreciate it. And I think you're going to enjoy the book.
Very exciting. Well, till later.
And read Bill's Washington Monthly piece.
Yes, please do. What do you have to plug on the Daily Beast?
All right, man. Safe travels.
You got Daily
Read
Beast.
my stuff at the Beast. Read Bill at the Washington Monthly.
And we'll see you in July.
See you in July. Godspeed.